Hello, and welcome to my show today on interpersonal communication. You're here with Dr. Marquita Byrd. I'm a professor emeritus at San Jose State Communication Studies Department. I've had the pleasure of teaching college students across the nation about interpersonal relationships, and I jokingly say that this course is these lectures are lectures that you should listen to before you go to divorce court or before you break up, because we can learn how to have effective, functional relationships that will help us not to go there. I have two goals today, and one is to help you to understand the significance of ending relationships. Oh no, we don't want to talk about ending relationships, but relationships do end, and I want to talk to you about how to do it in a healthy, effective manner so that we can limit the damage that we do to each other when we end relationships. And secondly, I'm hoping that you will acquire the skills and knowledge from this lecture in order to do that well, in order to end relationships in a healthy way. Let me share with you a passage. This is from Ecclesiastes 3:1-8. It's also been immortalized in a song by Pete Seeger called Turn, Turn, Turn. And the words simply say, for every time there is a season, and a time for every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up what has been planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to break down, and a time to build up. And so you see as this verse goes on, that it just talks about the fact that every single thing that happens in the human experience has a beginning and an ending. Even if that ending is simply the physical demise of the people involved in it, but there's a time for everything. And today we're going to be talking about a time for relationships to end and how we can handle those and do that without harming each other. So often, because we don't know how to end relationships, people hurt each other. We hurt each other emotionally, we hurt each other physically, we hurt each other financially, relationship-wise, we hurt each other when that's not necessary. If we understand that all relationships have a time to die, some may last a lifetime, but even then, when the people transition and leave the planet, the relationship is dead. So we're going to start out with something that I really like this idea, and it's called the spiritual child. The spiritual child is another word for talking about a relationship. The spiritual child is a way of talking about relationships as living things. And this idea was coined by a Rabbi Martin Buber, who was a Jewish theologian. And he wrote that a relationship is like a living thing. It is a living thing. And he named it the spiritual child. In relationships, there's me, there's you, and then there's the relationship itself. And that's the spiritual child. The relationship is the pattern of interaction that we engage in through verbal and nonverbal communication across time. That's what a relationship is, a pattern of interaction across time. And so Rabbi Buber suggested that our relationships are living things and that we must treat them like living things, and that they do have a time and a time to end. His famous book, I and Thou, is one where he discusses the spiritual child. We talked about what a relationship is. A relationship is a pattern of verbal and nonverbal communication or interactions across time. And a relationship is a living thing, thus it has a time to be born and a time to die. And it is the ending part that can be difficult. Most often, we're all excited when we meet a new friend or we need a new love interest. We meet the new baby. We meet the new relative. We meet the new co-workers. And often those times are very good times. However, when it's time for those relationships to end, it can be sad. For example, I have a friend of mine who worked for a company for 5 years, and she really, really enjoyed working there. But then there came a time that when she retired, and that was a very sad time. And then how do you then go about saying goodbye to a whole organization of people? But they handled it gracefully. They laughed, they cried, they hugged, they gave cards, they took her out to lunch. So they ended it in a way that was very effective. But endings are difficult. I admit that endings are difficult. Even when you're looking at a movie and the movie is coming to an end, it's kind of difficult to get to the end. Nobody teaches us how to end relationships. Oh, we talk a lot about how to start relationships. We hear a lot about beginning them, but mostly bad things about endings. There's poetry written, there's essays, there's movies, there's books all about falling in love and meeting new friends, but we don't teach people about ending. Here's some myths about relationships and their endings. The first one: if the relationship ends, there must be something wrong with one of us. Because if there was nothing wrong with us, we would still be in relationship. The second myth is that good relationships are supposed to last forever. And I often, because I am a teacher at a university and have freshmen coming in, often students will say that they feel bad or they feel guilty because their relationships from high school are over. Some of the people that they were very, very good friends with, they're not friends with anymore. And I have to talk about the fact that is a natural break in a relationship, because we're all leaving high school. People are going to different things. They're going to work. They're going to marriages. Some don't know where they're going, but that's a natural thing to happen. The third thing: well, since we are no longer friends, you never loved me or you never liked me anyway. If you did, the relationship wouldn't be over. That's not true either. You can be in a very serious friendship or love relationship or even a family relationship, but when it's over, that doesn't mean that you have failed in a relationship. It just means that it's time to be over. And the fourth belief is, well, if it's over, the relationship wasn't that important anyway. Again, not true. That's a myth. You can be in a very, very important relationship, but it may be time to move on for various reasons, and we're going to talk about those reasons. But those myths that we have, that one, something must be wrong with one of us if it ends. Two, that good relationships are supposed to last forever. Three, if we break up, you never really liked me anyway. Or four, the relationship wasn't that important. These are myths that cause ending to hurt more than it should. So you may be asking yourself, well, when the heck is the time for us to end a relationship? How do we know that the relationship needs to be over? And I love this phrase, and I have to admit, I don't know where I read it, but it was so profound that I memorized it. And it said that the relationship, the time it to be over, is when the tasks that are inherent in the relationship have been completed. I know that might sound like gobbledygook, but when the tasks that are inherent in the relationship have been completed, it's time for it to be over. So you may say, tasks, what are those? Those are things that we do together in this life. When those things that we do together have been completed, then the relationship may die a natural death. The spiritual child has died. And there's no one to blame. Here's the thing. I don't have to blame you. You don't have to blame me. It doesn't mean that you or the other person is a failure. It simply means that the pattern of interaction is over and you have completed the task that you were supposed to complete in this lifetime. Let's talk about some of those tasks. That sounds kind of nebulous when you say the task. What do those mean? For example, support. Supporting each other is a task that we undertake together. Protecting. Our parents take the task to protect us. Giving comfort to another person. Accomplishing goals. For example, I completed a master's and a PhD by the time I was 29. I could not have done that without the father of my son, the man I was married to at the time. And those were tasks that we completed in the time of our marriage. I finished graduate school. He finished his military experience. So once those tasks were over, it was time for the relationship to be finished. Surviving. Sometimes the task is just to survive. And man, have I got some good girlfriends who've helped me survive some severe problems in my life. Alleviate loneliness. One of our tasks is to help each other to not feel alone, not be alone, to enjoy life. Belonging. One of our tasks is to provide belonging for each other. I had a good friend who I knew for 30 years. She passed away last year. And her presence in my life helped me to not feel alone and to feel like I belonged to someone. She became more than a best friend. She became like a family relative. And so we had belonging. Self-actualization. Self-actualization means becoming all that you can be. I don't know if you remember that Army commercial. Be all that you can be. That means becoming self-actualized. But you cannot become self-actualized alone. You do that in the presence of other human beings. Those are the tasks. You may need help in someone to guide you, for example, or to share important things. Those are just 10 of the many tasks that we are involved in together in this life. But once those tasks are over, it may be time for the relationship to pass with it. Now, you may say, what are some of the reasons for ending relationships? Well, the most common reason is change. People change. People grow. They grow in different ways. One grows faster than the other. So growth and changing. People may decide that what they needed today is not what they need tomorrow, or what they needed yesterday is not what they need today. So needs change. Sometimes people have new revelations about themselves and their relations change. Let's say an extreme example, someone who has lived as a man or a woman and come to realize that that's not their real gender, and they want to reveal that, they want to become the gender that they feel themselves to be. Wow, that is a big change. Believe it or not, relationships do survive those, but that's a big change. People change. Situations change. Tasks are completed. For example, sometimes people, I'll give you a great example. Sometimes people are married while they're in the military, and in those years while they're in the military, that person who is in the military is home and then they're gone. They're home and they're gone. They may be gone for long periods of time. And in that way, the relationship exists over 20 years, 25 years. But unfortunately, sometimes when that is over and the person is no longer on active duty and no longer being away from home, the relationship doesn't work anymore. They've never really had to spend day in and day out with each other. They may not know each other that well, and so the marriage ends. The task may be completed. The context of relationship may change. I talked about people who have been in high school together, and then they graduate from high school and they're gone on to other contexts. I have been a member of a church and a minister in a church, but because I'm no longer in that church, then I don't interact with those people anymore. I still love them, and I'll still do whatever I can for them, and vice versa. But our relationships have passed. Distance can cause problems in a relationship, and people have to move great distances away from each other, even though they love each other and they like each other and they want to be together. They may move for jobs. They may move for school. Various reasons. Family needs may change, and so the distance is a problem. Dysfunctionality. If you're in a relationship and it's dysfunctional, the relationship is making you unwell emotionally, physically, financially, that's dysfunctional. And so you may need to end the relationship. The goals have changed. The goals have changed. Maybe what I wanted to do was to retire and stay home and putter in the garden, and somebody else wants to retire and stay and travel the world, and their goals have changed, and they may have ending of the relationship. Lack of stimulation. Human beings need stimulation, and you could be in a relationship where you're no longer stimulated by that person or by the circumstances. The loss of positive regard. Wow, this is a big one. Positive regards are any positive feelings that you may have for another. That could be liking, respect, love. So the loss of positive regard. And lastly, the failure to maintain. Because as Rabbi Byrd said, relationships are living. They have to be maintained. They have to be fed. They have to be nurtured with our time, our energy. And when we fail to do that, then the relationship can die. So these are just some of the reasons that relationships end. So we've talked about the tasks that are important in our relationships, and how when those tasks are over, then the relationship may change. Now, here's the question. how do relationships end? There's two ways. You can either have a gradual passing away, or you can have sudden death. When you have a gradual passing away, it is a slow process, and the relationship slowly dies. Usually the people who are in the relationship are aware that it is dying because it's taking over a period of time. But it's a gradual passing away. Very often it doesn't cause a lot of pain because we know it's ending. The second way is sudden death. Wow, sudden death. And that sudden death is when someone says something or does something that causes the relationship to be over right that instant. And we don't know what it is that changes from person to person. What may cause a relationship sudden death in between one pair may not cause sudden death in another. But let's say, for example, you're on a job and your boss says something to you that is you totally cannot accept it. It's disrespectful, it's hurtful, untrue, whatever the thing. Some people may quit right then and there on the spot. Sudden death, no passing away. Of course, that's not always the good thing to do because you may need that job tomorrow, but sudden death does happen. When the relationship ends, people engage in something called grave dressing. Grave dressing is when you tell everybody what happened, and it's always to your benefit. It's always puts you in a good light. But let's say you break up with the person you were dating and you had a group of friends. Both of you do grave dressing. Well, I ended the relationship because he never loved me anyway, and he didn't like me, he didn't treat me well, and I did everything that I could. That's grave dressing. Or I broke up because she was not happy with me, she was never satisfied with me, I could never do anything right. Grave dressing. So there we go. Now here's some guidelines for healthy endings. Believe it or not, you can end a relationship in a healthy way. That's what we want to, the goal we want to have. The first thing, never blame yourself or the other. Remember that you have a spiritual child between you. That is the relationship. And so I don't have to say you're a bad person. I'm not a bad person. There's no bad people here, but the child is dead, is dying. So you don't blame each other for the ending. Two, you may have a discussion about the things that went wrong and what could have gone better, but don't blame each other. The second thing, talk about the failure of the spiritual child. Was it dysfunctional? Was it inappropriate? Sometimes what's appropriate in a relationship at one time is not appropriate at another time. Is it harmful? Is something going on that's harming the people in the relationship? Number three, this is a big one. Do not engage in unethical behavior. Unethical behavior could be shouting at each other, cursing each other, physical altercations, physical ruin. Okay, I'm breaking up with you, so I'm going to go to the bank and take all of the money, and so that you'll have nothing when I'm gone. That's unethical, and that's not a good way to end relationships, because you don't want to end it in such a way that there's hostilities, there's hard feelings. That's not to say that you're going to get rid of all hostilities and feelings in the other person, but you don't want to create that by being unethical. 4, forgive. Wow. Instead of blaming me, blaming you, I'm going to forgive me and I'm going to forgive you. Why do we forgive? We don't forgive for the sake of the other person, because forgiving someone does not mean they're going to change, and forgiving them doesn't mean that you can change something that happened in the past. But you heal for yourself, so you forgive so that you can heal. We forgive not for the sake of the other person, but we forgive for ourselves, because if you don't forgive, then you won't heal. I heard someone say that when you don't forgive someone, it's like tying a dummy around your waist with a rope, and everywhere you go, so does that dummy. When you forgive, you untie the rope, you release that person, and you release yourself. The lack of forgiveness is like poison, and this is the truth. Every day that you choose not to forgive, you are poisoning yourself just a little bit. And guess what? A little bit of poison every day eventually kills you. It kills your spirit. It kills your drive. So forgiving people is not for them, it's for you. And so when you're breaking up, when you're ending relationships, remember to forgive. I'm not saying you're going to be able to forgive right that instant, but you need to be working on that. 5, be aware of your feelings. Now sometimes people will say, well, you just knew that person for such and such a time. Why are you grieving? Time has nothing to do with it, but the relationship does. And you may feel fear. I met a woman one time that I only knew for 6 months, and I just loved her so much. I loved her like my best auntie. And when she passed away, my dad said, well, you've only known her for a short time, daughter. How can you be so involved? How could you love her so much? I did, because of the way she treated me. And when she passed away, I had fear that maybe I wouldn't find a friend like that again. And in fact, when I moved to San Jose, the place where I live now, I left a very small town with a very small church. And I had fear that I wouldn't meet people like that here in San Jose. You may have a feeling of loss. And of course, you have lost something, because a relationship is a living thing. And when living things die or pass away, we've lost something. Even flowers. People have flowers in their houses, and when the flower dies, they're upset. You may feel depression. But you may also feel joy. You may feel happiness. You may feel freedom. I'm finally free. I'm released. You may feel contentment. And I had to work through that with a friend of mine that I had for about 10-15 years. And for an unknown reason, she decided that we couldn't be friends anymore. And she would never explain to me what I could have possibly done. I asked for her forgiveness. And I said, I apologize for anything that I might have said in thought, word, or deed that may cause this breakup. But she never answered. So I grieved about it for a while. I mourned the loss. And then one day it came to me, hey, I'm glad we're not friends anymore, because she was a lot of work. And so I was able then to release, to forgive, and to move on to other things. So be aware of your feelings. Lastly, give yourself time to grieve. Give yourself time to mourn the loss. You don't want to grieve and mourn so long that it incapacitates you. You don't want to let it become so overwhelming. If that happens, you may need some counseling. You may need some advising. But there's a normal time to grieve, and that depends on the culture. In Korea, for example, if a parent dies, people expect you to mourn for a year, and they're not upset if you act kind of off kilter or things are different, because they know you're mourning. And then after a year, you're supposed to be over it and come on, let's come back to work. So give yourself some time to mourn and grieve. So I will end this lesson with the same thing I began it with, and that is the song Turn, Turn, Turn by Pete Seeger. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. Ultimately, a time to keep silent, a time to speak, a time to love, a time to hate, a time of war, and a time for peace. Hopefully at the end of your relationships, you will end them in a peaceful manner so that you can heal and refrain from harming each other. Remember that for every relationship there is a season, there's a time to be born and a time to die. And as Neil Sedaka said in 1960, I'm giving you my age, but in 1960 Neil Sedaka said, breaking up is hard to do. I'm ending this today with words from my favorite person, Mr. Spock, who says, live long and prosper.